All right, guys, so today we're going to be talking about how to multiply decimal numbers. So before we start, I want to review a little bit the place value when we're talking about decimals. So remember, starting with our decimal places, we have the tenths place, which is here. We have the hundredths place, which is here. And we have the thousandths place, which is here. So there's a 7 in the tenths place, a 2 in the hundredths place, and a 5 in the thousandths place. So if we were going to read this number, we would say 14 and 725 thousandths. Now, one thing I want to keep in mind is remember that it takes 10 of these tenths, so it takes 10 of these tenth pieces to make a whole. It takes 10 of these hundredth pieces to make a tenth, and it takes 10 of these thousandth pieces to make a hundredth. Keep in mind that every place value is 10 times bigger than the place value before it. That also works if we go to ones to tens. That would be 10 times bigger. Our number system is completely based around this number 10. Now, I want to take a look at a second at three problems, starting with 3 and 4 tenths, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we can use this concept of 10. So if we take any number and multiply it by 10, just like we are looking at right here, one easy way that we can quickly multiply a number by 10 is by basically taking this decimal here and moving it over one single time. So notice we've moved it from where it was between the 3 and the 4. Now we've moved it over one place. The reason that we can do that is because every place value is 10 times bigger than the place value before it. So if we move that decimal over once, we've basically just multiplied by 10. So 3 and 4 tenths times 10 would give us 34. And you could put that decimal at the end or not. It's either way would be fine. Now, same idea. If we multiply by 100, like we were doing in this second spot over here, remember 100 is the same as saying 10 times 10. So 100 is the same as multiplying by 10 two times. So if you remember from before, when we multiplied by 10 one time, we moved the decimal over one place. So if we're multiplying by 100, we're multiplying by 10 twice. So basically, we can move the decimal over two places. So the decimal would now be here. Keep in mind there's no digit in this space, so we can put a 0. So we know then that 3 and 4 tenths times 100 would be 340. And again, you can put the decimal at the end if you'd like. Same idea. When we multiply a number by 1,000, 1,000 is the same as 10 times 10 times 10. So multiplying by 10 three times would be the same as multiplying by 1,000. Because of this, we know that if we multiply a number by 1,000, a quick way to figure it out would be to take this decimal and to move it 1, 2, 3 times. Because each time you move that decimal over, you're multiplying that number by 10. And if we multiply that number by 10 three times, that's the same as multiplying by 1,000. So we know now that the decimal is going to be here. And I'm going to place these zeros here to fill in the gaps. And that is going to tell us that 3 and 4 tenths times 1,000 is 3,400. Now, this is a really quick way that helps us to multiply tens, hundreds, and thousands. And the reason we can do that is because of that concept of every place value being 10 times bigger than the one before it. Now, before we can move on to multiply decimals, we have to look at one more concept. Just like multiplying by 10, we can also quickly divide a decimal by 10, 100, and 1,000. So we're going to start off with the first one here. If we're dividing a decimal by 10, we're literally going to do the exact opposite of when we multiplied it by 10. So notice when we multiplied it by 10, we moved it one time to the right. So we move the decimal one time this way. When we divide by 10, we're going to move it one time in the opposite direction because every place value is 10 times bigger than the rest. So if we move it backwards, that's the same thing as dividing. So when we divide by 10, we're going to take this decimal and we're going to move it once to the left, which would tell me that this first one would be 7 and 72/100ths. Same idea. If I divide a decimal number by 100, that is the same exact thing as dividing by 10 2 times. So I know that to divide by 10, I moved my decimal 1 time to the left. So to divide by 100, I'm going to move it backwards 2 times. We'll get a decimal here. I will put a 0 at the beginning, and we will get 772 thousandths. Same idea as before. If I divide a decimal by 1,000, or divide any number by 1,000, that's the same thing as dividing by 10 3 times. Dividing by 10 3 times. So I know that I can move my decimal back 3 times, and that each time I'm moving my decimal back, 1, 2, 3, that is the same as dividing that number by 10. So if I would do this, I would get 0 and 772. This is actually 10 thousandths. 772 10 thousandths. So just a quick recap. To multiply by 10, 100, and 1,000, we can either move the decimal over once to multiply by 10, twice to multiply by 100, or 3 times to multiply by 1,000. Keep in mind, the reason we do it twice for 100 is because 100 is the same as multiplying by 10 twice. 1,000 is the same as multiplying by 10 3 times. For dividing, we can move the decimal back 1 for dividing by 10, back 2 times for dividing by 100, or back 3 times when dividing by 1,000. Now let's look at a couple places where this might help us. If we are looking at a multiplication problem such as this, $4.99 times 15, or 4.99 times 15. One easy way I go about solving this is I think about these numbers as whole numbers. So notice we have the decimal right here and $4.99 or 4.99. So one thing that I like to do is I like to take this decimal and move it over 1, 2 times, so now that it's here. Now the reason I like to do that is because if you've moved it over twice, we now have a whole number. But we have to think about what we actually did to that number. If we moved the decimal over twice, what we actually did was we multiplied that number by 100. Now you may think to yourself, well, why would I want to change the problem by multiplying by 100? Well, when I multiplied that number by 100, I now have 499 times 15. Now notice we don't have to worry about a decimal anymore. So if we have 499 divided by 15, I can solve that, and then though I have to make up for what I did in the end. So first let's solve it. So 499 times 15, we can solve just like we would normally solve a multiplication problem. 9 times 5 is 45. 9 times 5 is 45 plus 4 is 49. 5 times 4 is 20 plus 4 is 24. Put down our 0 because we're moving on to the tens place. 1 times 9 is 9. 1 times 9 is 9. And 1 times 4 is 4. If we add those two together, we get 7,485. Now keep in mind, we had changed the problem because in the very beginning, up here, we had multiplied that problem by 100. So because we multiplied it by 100, in the end, we're going to make up for that by doing the exact opposite. So in the end, we're actually going to take our answer and we're going to divide it by 100. So the way I'm going to do that is, since it's a whole number, I know that my decimal is at the very end. So to divide by 100, remember that is the same as dividing by 10 twice. So when I divide by 10, I'm going to move my decimal back. So in this case, I'm going to move it back 2 times. And we're going to end up with a final answer of 74 and 85 hundredths. So that's one example of how this would work. Let's look at a second example. So a second example might be a time where we're multiplying a decimal by a decimal. In this case, it works pretty much the same way, pretty similar. So notice this first number here, 25 and 5/10. Notice we have a decimal, so we can actually move that decimal over to change that into a whole number. So if I moved this decimal over to here, I have moved that decimal over 1 time. Remember, if I move my decimal over once to the right, I have multiplied that number by 10, and now I have 255. Now this one's a little bit different because the second number over here also has a decimal. So since it has a decimal, I'm actually going to do the exact same thing. So I'm going to move this decimal also over 1 time. So it's over here now. And if I move this decimal over, I'm also going to multiply this by 10, which would give me 15. Now notice I now have 2 whole numbers. I have 255 times 15. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to the side, over here, and I'm going to multiply 255 times 15. 5 times 5 is 25. 5 times 5 is 25 plus 2 is 27. 5 times 2 is 10 plus 2 is 12. Put my 0 down because I'm heading to the 10s. 1 times 5 is 5. 1 times 5 is 5. And 1 times 2 is 2. Add those together. We get 3,825. Now keep in mind that I changed the problem in the beginning. So let's go back and look at what I did. Remember, I multiplied this number by 10, but I also multiplied this number by 10. So since I multiplied by 10 twice, that is the same as multiplying my answer by 100. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm going to make up for that by dividing by 100. And remember, when I divide by 100, that's the same as dividing by 10 twice. So I'm dividing by 10 because I did this, and I'm dividing by 10 again because I did this. So the way I'm going to show that is I'm going to move my decimal back 1, 2 times, and I will get 38 and 25 hundredths. So that's a quick tutorial on how to multiply 2 decimal numbers. Hopefully that helps you out a little bit. Really be thinking about the tens, hundreds, and thousands, and how you're changing the place values of those numbers. One other suggestion is I would always suggest that you think before you start about what types of answers would make sense, as I always say. So good luck with multiplying decimals, and I really hope that helps a little bit.